This episode is sponsored by the Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races in West Virginia. Must be 21 to enter the casino floor and attend a show. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. This week brings both the World Series and Halloween, so it's the perfect time to remember Abbott and Costello, who gave us the hilarious Who's on First baseball routine and spooky comedies like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I had the honor of speaking to Lou Costello's daughter, Chris Costello, for a full hour, breaking down her father's entire career from vaudeville to radio, television to the movies. Enjoy. Hey, Chris Costello, daughter of Lou Costello, of course, of Abbott and Costello. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I wanted to hop on and chat with you. Obviously, we can peg it to Halloween, of course, because, there were so many of those great Abbott and Costello meets fill in the blank monsters of Halloween. And we can get to that, later in our chronological journey here. But I wanted to tee it up first, just to give you the platform to promote the memoir that you wrote. It's called Lose on First. Tell us where we can pick it up and in whatever audiobook form. Yeah, however you want to tease it.
Well, the actual book was published back in 83, I believe. And it was on the stands for 22 years, which to me is record breaking. And I decided during COVID, I had to do something with my time, my mind. And people had been asking me if I was ever going to do an audiobook, based on the book. And I always kind of put it off because I knew it was a major undertaking. But when COVID came along, I said, wow, I've got all the time in the world. And so a friend of mine, Emma Wise, she produced it. And we found a wonderful sound engineer out of San Francisco, June Miller. And so we did everything out of what I called Studio C, which is the walk in closet. And it was maybe 4 months of really labor intensive work, because I was trying so desperately to bring to life, my dad and Bud and all of the people who knew him. And so that was kind of like retrieving all of my acting background. And I used to do a lot of voiceovers. So I kind of used that. And then I decided, we got to give some life to this audiobook. And what better way to do it than to see if we could incorporate some of Bud and Lou's actual routines with them doing it. And we got permission from Universal. Thank you, Universal. And we have a couple of the routines, a few of the routines actually built right in. So as I start off the routine, my voice dies down and their voices come up. We also decided to add a bonus chapter, which so many people through the years had said, what happened following your parents' deaths? Because my mother passed away 9 months after my dad in 1959. So I thought, okay, here's another great way. Let's do the bonus chapter, add in what happened to the kids, to people, Bud Abbott, etc. So we've got that in, which of course the actual book does not have. And then to really bump it up a notch, Pam and I decided, hey, maybe there's collectors out there that would like to have, they can't have the actual physical book because I certainly don't have any more copies. And the copies I do have are locked in storage for the next generation. But I said, let's put together a 10 CD collector set that is just for, people that want to have something physical, the audiobook in physical form. And we included an 8-page pamphlet called the Costello Family Photo Album. And it's been doing rather well. It's not, you can't find it on Amazon or on any of the online shopping platforms. I self-funded this, and we do a limited edition. It's maybe 200 copies. And so if anyone is interested in that aspect of the Lose on First audiobook, they can certainly contact me at I'll give you the email address, which is accollectibles at AOL.com.
AC
And
Collectibles, the AC as in Abbott and Costello, folks. So that's easy to remember. AC Collectibles at AOL.com for the 10
that's
set
correct.
CD collector set of the audiobook, if you want to go that route.
Right.
That's
And if they
awesome.
just want to listen to the straight audio book without purchasing the CD collector set, you can go on any of the online audiobook platforms and you'll find it there.
Yeah, you can stream it audiobook style if you want, but
Sure.
we're talking about this really cool collector's CD set. Maybe if you got some parents, grandparents, maybe holidays coming up, that'd be kind of a cool idea for Abbott and Costello fans.
That's
Well,
that's so true.
that's awesome. A little stocking stuffer. Well, maybe you might have 10 stockings to stuff with 10 CDs, but that's
You'll have
great.
to
All
get a
right.
pretty wide stocking there.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, that's fantastic. Well, that's great. Everyone, pick that up. Well, while we, since we're talking, let's, folks, I want you to view this, folks, as we're about to go on a journey through, your dad's the legendary career, some of my favorite movies of his, etc. If you'll indulge me, but just know that this is just a teaser, folks. We're gonna, these are some of the highlights as we go. But if you want the full thing, you got to check out Lose On First, the audiobook and the memoir, the CDs. All right. Well, so let's start. Let's start at the beginning then. Remind our listeners a little bit about your dad's, his origin story. I know he was born in New Jersey in 1906. And he was a pretty good athlete growing up. I read, but was he also? Didn't he also admire, the early silent film comedians like Charlie Chaplin? I want to know a little bit how he was, growing up and maybe some of his early influences.
Well, Dad, according to my grandmother, he was always very agile on his feet. Even as a kid, he was always pulling pranks, making people laugh. He used to go down their banister, backwards and then do this backflip and land
You
on
see
his
that in
feet.
some of the movies too. Which one is it?
Yeah,
Hold that ghost when he
that was
flies through
just
the wall.
exactly that's just who he was. But she said that he also had great athletic abilities. And I think a lot of his training came from when he was actually an amateur boxer under the name of Lew King. And, it was a short lived career, of course. When my grandfather went to see him, unbeknownst to my dad, and sat ringside with my dad's uncle. And the next morning, my dad came out with this beautiful shiner and so my grandfather just looked at him over breakfast and said, "So how did it go, Lou King?" And that kind of ended that. It was very short lived. But he learned all the moves. I mean, it was just beautiful. He always loved the arts, and as much as he loved the sports, he loved the films, the silent films. So as a kid, he would go to the theater, sometimes ditching school with his older brother, Pat, to go see some of the silent westerns. He was a big western fanatic, but he always had this deep love, for Charlie Chaplin. And he thought of Chaplin as an actor, I think more than as a comic. And so my grandmother would tell the story of him in, I think it was like early high school, and they had a Halloween contest at the Armory. And dad, of course, dressed up like Charlie Chaplin, unbeknownst to my grandparents. And he came down the aisle. And as he got to the stage, he did a little like trip. And he turned around. He was doing all the moves with the cane and the facial, expressions. And he won first place. And my grandmother was just shocked when she found out it was my dad. So, um,
It's funny you
you know,
mentioned that
he,
because apparently you've probably heard this trivia fact before, but apparently Charlie Chaplin in his heyday was so, arguably the most recognizable silhouette out there. But he was so popular that one time he and Charlie Chaplin himself entered a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest one time and placed third.
oh my God, that's hysterical.
He was so
Oh, that
famous,
is
others could be him better than him.
that is funny. I
That's
never
great.
knew that. Well, what's very interesting about, my dad with Chaplin is that it was Chaplin who I think motivated him to want to try to be an actor and go to Hollywood the first time in the mid 20s.
He hitchhiked to Hollywood, right?
He hitchhiked. Yes, yes. And well, his brother gave him money to take the bus, but my dad decided to save the money and hitchhike. Back then, a lot different. You didn't have the freeways. It was really just an open road. Um, but he ended up in Hollywood. He got some extra work at MGM. He even got some stunt work. One funny story was when they asked him if he could ride a horse, and he said, sure. And they put him on this horse, but the horse took off and the saddle slipped, and he was almost riding the horse sideways. But he said he never did that again. And he, worked on a variety of different films as an extra. And the one that I love seeing, because you can find it, I believe, on YouTube, is it was an epic film made during the day. I think it even ran about a couple of hours long, but I could be wrong. Is Trail of 98, where he plays this guy from the Klondike area walking into a saloon, but you have to look really quick because he walks in on crutches and then is out of camera range. He also appeared as an extra ringside in a Laurel and Hardy film called Battle of the Century.
Right.
And you can actually, if you bring it up on YouTube, you can actually see some of the early beginnings of the Lou Costello character that people would identify when he and Bud became famous, in their films. It's kind of wild to watch because he's very, very, very young. He was in his early 20s at the time. But at that point, he wasn't really getting enough to survive on. So it was one of the actresses that I believe appeared in Trail of 98 who said to him, go back to New Jersey, hone your craft, then let Hollywood ask for you. And that's what he did. And he got as far as St. Joe, Missouri, and he ran out of money. He saw across the street from this coffee shop where he was probably spending his last few dollars on a meal, and they were advertising for a Dutch comic. Well, he had no idea what a Dutch comic was. So he went over there and applied, and they told him, well, a Dutch comic speaks with a Dutch accent, wears baggy pants, oversized shoes. And he said, I tell you what, I'm not speaking with a Dutch accent. I'm going to lose the oversized shoes. But he said, the rest I think I can do. Well, that was his training ground right there. And he worked, I think, in St. Joe, Missouri for about 16 months. And I have to look at my own book now. And he worked his way back to New Jersey and started appearing in tab shows. And he worked with a couple of straight men. But he was a dancing juvenile, which is sort of the warm up act for the Top Banana.
Right.
And sometimes he would get more laughs than the Top Banana. So they really came down on him pretty hard. But that was like, sadly, we don't have that training ground today for
Yeah.
a lot of the young people coming up. But back then, burlesque was where you went to hone your craft.
Exactly.
And it was only a matter of time before he would meet Bud Abbott, who had started his career much earlier than Dad. I think Dad was still probably in school, when Bud was out on the circuit. Bud, who was amazing. He started out as a ticket taker, graduated to producing these small tab shows, met his wife Betty Abbott while he was in burlesque, and they put on shows together. She even became his straight woman for a while, and they teamed up, as Abbott and Abbott, I guess, or Bud
Oh
and
wow,
Betty
it's weird
Abbott.
to think that he wasn't the straight person in that original with him and his
Right,
because
right.
he was the perfect straight man to your dad's zany antics. But that's funny.
Oh
He
yeah.
was on
Well,
the other side at first. Interesting.
it's the chemistry.
Yeah.
It's certainly the chemistry. And to be a straight man, it's tough work, which is why they got the larger percentage.
Yeah.
60%, the comic got 40.
Mm,
That was just an established thing back in burlesque.
right.
And, people have said, well, why should a straight man get more? And it's very easy with the research you do on it. The straight man had all the work on his shoulders. If the gag failed, it was because of the straight man, not the comic.
Exactly.
But a
The
good straight man could
reaction.
make
Yeah.
the comic look phenomenal.
Exactly.
And so Bud really was seasoned, and he learned also a lot about being a straight man from his cousin or an uncle named Al Golden. And so he had some of the best out there helping him, graduate from this level to another level. The funny story is that I recently read, because we retrieve so much information off of Facebook, this and that, and where back in, oh my gosh, maybe the early 20s, maybe I think it was maybe 1919, 1920, where when Bud first stepped out on the stage to perform, and they said basically it was going to be a crapshoot whether this guy made it or not, because he walked out, he was very stiff. Of course, you are your first time on a stage.
Yeah.
He was used to producing the shows, not appearing in the shows, but I think he felt that why pay a straight man $50 if I can go out there and do it and save the money? And they said he looked out at the audience, and all of a sudden he fainted. And that was his first, entree onto the stage. But from there, he started working with some wonderful comics. He started to learn so much about the straight man role. He was one of the most sought after straight men in the industry back then. And when my dad first met him, my dad was working with another comic. Bud was working with or dad was working with a straight man, Bud with another comic. My dad's straight man got sick, and Bud happened to be on the bill that night and filled in for him. What's interesting is in burlesque, they had a whole stockpile of routines that would be used. And some would take these routines and mold them into their own, which is basically what Abbott and Costello did when they first teamed up. Like Who's on First, as an example. Who's on First was a baseball routine that had been done in burlesque, not the way they did it, but it had based off of Who's the Boss or
Mm.
Volts and Watts, Baker's Dozen. And what Bud and Lou did is they took the basic format of this baseball routine and they gave all the players funny names, and they created their own dialogue with the help of John Grant, their head comedy writer, who then followed them to Hollywood.
Yeah, I just want to I
And
want to underscore that for listeners is that Who's on First. I know while we've seen it in many of their movies, it really began back in those early vaudeville days in what was it like 37? Was that the first vaudeville version of Who's on First? Radio broadcast was 38, but it was like mid
well,
30s they started doing it.
it's hard to pinpoint where the first actual performance of Who's on First with Abbott and Costello started, because they teamed up. I believe it was in 1936 or 37, because my parents were married at the time that they joined as a team, and my parents were married in 1930, 34. So maybe it was in 36, where they teamed up.
Right, right.
And it was magic from the first time they worked together on the stage. One of the bits they did was the lemon bit, which Bud had been doing long before he met my dad. And if you remember the lemon bit, which you can see in the Navy, where there's like the hole in the table
Mm-hmm.
and it drops into a basket. Bud does it brilliantly with the cup over the ball or the lemon.
Yeah.
But he was doing that long before he met Dad. And then when they did it one time on the stage, and I think Dad knew of the routine, but of course they incorporated, their own style to it. And it was following their first performance together when people started to say, you guys really should team up and become a team. You're great together. Betty Abbott even promoted it, saying, you've got to team up. You've got to team up. So Dad was committed to going to Chicago to do the Orpheum, and Bud sent him a telegram saying, when you get back, let's talk. I think, we should see about teaming up together. And Dad said, I'll be back on such and such a date. Hold on, let's do it. And, that's when they officially teamed up, was I think back in 1936.
I
But
love it.
what gave Abbott and Costello the visibility beyond the burlesque stage to a whole nationwide audience. And of course, through with Who's on First, that elevated them and into Hollywood, catapulted them rather, is the Kate Smith show. And Ted Collins, her manager, at first said, he didn't think Abbott and Costello would translate well under radio because he felt they were too visual. He had seen them
Mm.
in burlesque, but felt they were way too visual. And it was through the William Morris Agency who started to handle them and also handled Kate Smith, who said, give them a try, give them a try. Even Henny Youngman, suggested them because as a summer replacement because he had to come out to Hollywood to do a film. Ted Collins agreed. And he said that a couple of times they were so electric on radio that the audience, and they had an in studio audience, could not stop laughing. And then a couple of times he caught Kate Smith watching them from the other side of the room because it was done in a studio with an audience. And she was just doubled over, just hysterical. And he would be trying to get Abbott and Costello off so he could get Kate on, but she absolutely adored them, and
The
from what
first
I
lady of
understand,
radio, she was called.
yeah, she absolutely adored them, got a big kick out of them.
So they're well known, at least on like the vaudeville circuit, and now radio, as you're saying, now they're getting beamed into living rooms and listening to or over the radio waves. And before we move into their Hollywood, I just want to put a pin in who's on first. I mean, because Time Magazine named it the greatest comedy routine of the entire 20th century. So, folks, think of any of your favorite comedians. Abbott Costello's Who's on First top them when Time look back on the whole century. I mean, I think it deserves that title. But why do you think it works so well? It's the straight man, and it kind of builds. It builds, and then there's always calls back. I know third base. Like, is it the cyclical nature of it, or why do you think it works?
Well, I think first of all, you don't even have to be a fan of baseball to really get the humor out of it. uh, I think it was just, if you read the script of Who's on First, it's not funny, but it's what Bud and Lou did together
Right.
to create that humor. And a lot of it was the pacing of it. It was the expressions. Of course, you can't see expressions on radio, but with the voice, Dad's frustration, Bud's calmness. I mean, there's so many factors that, are incorporated into that routine. But I think what's so important to put out there to everybody is that they never did the routine the same way twice. Because Bud always felt that if you do it the same way every time you perform a routine, it becomes very stagnant. So Bud and Lou were very, very used to and enjoyed ad libbing. So if you listen to the routine, they'll incorporate a word here, a word there, maybe a new expression, whatever. But they never did the routine the same way twice. Great story. Las Vegas, 1950s. I think they were at I think it was the Sahara. I'm not sure, but I think it was the Sahara. And the whole family was ringside. I was too young. I was not there. But my aunt used to tell the story of them ringside, watching them perform. And it came to doing Who's on First. And somehow dad veered totally away from the routine. And Bud, they said you could see that he had beads of perspiration on his brow. How am I going to get him back to where he started? And the routine lasted something like 20 minutes. And it's only an 8-minute routine.
Yeah.
And the family knew what was happening. The audience did not. The audience was hysterical.
Yeah.
And of course, Bud got him back. But that's what they would do, to spice it up a little bit,
Yeah. After
is
doing
they
it
would
so
ad
many
lib.
times. Yeah.
Yeah, they would ad lib. But boy, that night, my Aunt Marie laughingly would say, you can't believe how nervous we all were at that table because we knew that they had gotten lost in that
Right.
routine. But they were so brilliant at it that the audience sitting there had no idea what was going on. They were geniuses when it came, to these routines.
Yeah. Oh, that's the legendary, quote unquote, what do you call it? Patter routine. And it's actually a good segue now into the films they made. Because, I believe they included at least a shorter version of Who's on First in their debut film One Night in the Tropics in 1940, which I know they were more like supporting roles in that. And by the way, we don't have time to get to all of the movies, so I'll just throw out some of my favorites, and I'll go somewhat chronologically. So, but I want to ask you about their first leading, as a leading duo in Buck Privates the following year in 41. Gosh, you got the Andrews sisters singing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. You got some great gags, like your dad does the little botched rifle routine where the drill sergeant's calling out the instructions and he keeps getting hit with the rifle. But at least speak to how they did a lot of military films there. Like in the Navy was 41, Keep 'em Flying. I think they did like a war bond tour and raised like 85 million in 35 days or something in 42, right at the outset of the U.S. joining World War II. So yeah, I mean, how important was movies like Buck Privates and In the Navy and Keep 'em Flying? Yeah, why do you think they clicked with a nation, on the brink of war?
I think, first of all, the studios, not just Universal, but the studios were starting to make the service films. And I believe that Universal knew that they had a hot commodity in Abbott and Costello after the returns came in on One Night in the Tropics, because for being supported players, they took over the whole film because they kept adding in more and more and more routines. Quick story: Alan Jones, who I interviewed for my book, he said that it was the first time he didn't use his editing rights on the film. And he said, I thought Abbott and Costello were brilliant. He said, I saw them in burlesque long before we did One Night in the Tropics. But he said, I had no idea that the studio was going to incorporate more and more of Abbott and Costello in their routines. So he said he's in South America years later. He's walking down a street and he happens to see a theater marquee, and at the top, Abbott and Costello in One Night in the Tropics. And he stopped, looked at it. He said, where the hell am I? So he said it completely went from being, an Alan Jones, Nancy Kelly film to an Abbott and Costello film. But I think the studio knew that the service films were very important, boost the morale. People needed laughter more than anything, and they knew Abbott and Costello could deliver. So I think the most um, obvious thing would put him into a service film. Dad and Bud had such a wide range of routines, and John Grant started taking a lot of these old burlesque vaudeville routines and incorporating them into the film. One of the funniest scenes for me was the Neptune scene where they're on the battleship, and it's he takes the water, from the bucket, and he holds it in his mouth and keeps spitting it out. To me, it's just it's a that scene makes me laugh because when he spits it out and starts laughing, he broke character. I mean, he was ad libbing,
Yeah.
but that's to me was a funny one. Also, him in the hammock,
Yeah.
trying to get into the hammock, and he had said to his brother Pat, who had served in World War I and again in World War II, was trying to show my dad how you get into a hammock. He said, but once you're in the hammock, he said it's really comfortable. And Dad looked at him and said, Pat, they're not going to laugh at me if I'm just in the hammock. They're going to laugh at me if I fall out of the hammock.
Yeah.
So that hammock scene in Buck Privates is hysterical. And of
There's
course,
so many good
the
ones.
Neptune scene was in the Navy.
Yeah.
Now, if you want a funny story, let's move to Keep 'em Flying, which was shot at the Cal Aero Airfield out in Ontario, California. And Pat, my dad's brother, who was the same size, it was a look-alike of my dad. He did all of the stunts that you see on the torpedo, and where the torpedo was going through the hangar and stuff with my dad, riding it. He said, well, that was Pat, his brother in the long shots, not my dad.
Ah,
But
okay.
Pat said that the little guy that was driving it from within the torpedo, so there was actually a driver in that torpedo. He kept making the hard left, the hard right, and throwing Pat off. And every time Pat would be thrown off, my dad would be hysterical. And they kept, I think they kept it. No, I don't think they kept it in where he falls off. but there's a couple of scenes where he slides down close to the propeller, and Pat said he could feel that propeller getting very close to his backside. Um, and he said that even in the scenes where the plane, the stunt plane,
Yeah.
who was Paul Mance, who was a notable stunt flyer, and they were going to take it through three hangars. This plane, it was going to go right through the hangars, and Pat said we did the first take and we went through the first hangar. He said, I don't remember going through the second or third because I passed out. But there's a lot of hysterical routines in Keep 'em Flying.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks for hitting those military ones. Now I want to go into, sort of the we'll call them sort of, I guess, like the haunted house sort of films, like Hold That Ghost in 41, and then The Time of Their Lives, like you mentioned in 46. And I promise, folks, we'll get to the, the Meets the Monster movies at the end to wrap it around to Halloween. But real quick before that, yeah, that I want to talk about those sort of haunted house ones. So Hold That Ghost in 41. I love that movie where they start as those gas station attendants and this shootout, the gangster shootout, end up at this supposedly haunted house with the great stuff like that moving candle gag and all that stuff, hanging the coats on the coat rack, and that causes the room to transform into this whatever prohibition gambling gambling area, speakeasy kind of stuff.
Well, I think with Hold That Ghost, I mean, the chemistry between Joan Davis and Dad
Yeah.
was amazing. That dance sequence with him
In the
uh,
puddle.
uh, sitting in the bucket, and
Yeah.
getting up and they're doing the rumba or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. That was all ad-libbed with Dad,
Wow.
even going into the piano, flying into the piano.
Yeah.
Uh, I, Many people have asked, why didn't Joan Davis do more with Abbott and Costello? And to me, it was just probably a contractual thing. But I thought she was just absolutely wonderful in Hold That Ghost, and a great comedian. So I think he appreciated that too.
Oh yeah.
Um, you know, Dad and Bud absolutely loved having people, that were from burlesque, or they were very supportive of comedians. And his favorite comedian was Judy Canova, um, and Lucille Ball, of course, and Joan Davis. But
Yeah.
it was just sad that she couldn't have appeared in more films, but it was a great film. I loved it. And the moving
Absolutely.
candle always cracks me up. And you see the moving candle again in Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein. They
Yeah.
would just tailor it a little differently.
Yeah, and before we get to that, yeah, Time of Their Lives we mentioned, it's just great. Well, so Hold That Ghost, it turns out it's not technically haunted. We think it is, but it's just these, tough guys trying to scare them
Yeah.
for the money. But Time of Their Lives, it actually is a ghost story, and you could watch CBS's sitcom Ghost nowadays, and it's so inspired by Time of Their Lives with these these old Revolutionary War folks when your dad plays, and then they die in the well and all that stuff. They're framed as traitors, and they come back, and I love what I love about Time of Their Lives is you had Bud Abbott as sort of the modern day guy, and he's getting scared by flickering lights and sounds at pianos and stuff. But really, what I love about it, it's just saying that your dad and this co-star, they're just like these ghosts amazed at this modern technology of light switch. They're just turning it on all
Well,
amazed, and he's getting scared. But yeah, talk about why you love Time of Their Lives so
well,
much.
he gets shot, and what a great gag is
Yeah.
when he goes to take a drink of water from the well, and all of a sudden the water comes spurting out,
Squirts out the holes,
yeah, yeah, all over his body.
the bullet holes. So
Which
good.
I think is hysterical. And I got to credit John Grant. The man was just brilliant when it came to taking some of these routines and bits and creating new ones. For Abbott and Costello, he was absolutely wonderful. He was like the third member, of that team.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Time of
Yeah.
Their Lives was different. They weren't teamed up, which I kind of liked, and it showed Bud as being a real comedian. I mean, he is absolutely hysterical as that doctor.
Oh yeah.
I just crack up laughing. In fact, it's because of Bud that I love that film so much.
Yeah.
I love all of his scenes. He's just wonderful.
It's a great movie. I think there's a character, Lady Danbury, which I think inspired a character in Bridgerton. So I'm tying in the new shows with these classics. So yeah, Time of Their Lives, Hold That Ghost, all those kind of, haunted house films are just classic. But I want to now move into the Abbott and Costello meets blank because those are great use of all those great Universal monster movies that were big like in the 30s, and now they're coming back sort of as horror comedies with your dad and Abbott. So let's start with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948, arguably their most famous beloved movie of any genre they did. That horror comedy might be their masterpiece. At least I know it's the one that was in the American Film Institute's top 100 comedies. So I mean, it's a classic. Just talk about what you love about it. Is it Bela Lugosi as Dracula? Is it Lon Chaney Jr. as Wolfman? Glenn Strange, not Boris Karloff, but Glenn Strange as Frankenstein's monster. Is it the novelty of seeing all of them, or is it like just the quality of the gags, like the spinning, rotating wall thing?
I think to back it up, there's a little bit of a backstory here, is
Sure.
that I believe it was Boris Karloff who was first asked to play the Frankenstein monster. And he turned it down because he thought that Universal was trying to make the monsters funny, which he didn't approve of. He took it very seriously, as I think, Bela did, when portraying Dracula.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think with Dad and possibly Bud, and this is what I heard from the director, Charlie Barton, is that in the beginning, when Dad and Bud were approached with the script of Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, Dad went crazy. He did not like it.
Really?
And the reason being is he thought that Universal no longer had trust in them carrying a film with their
Um,
names above the title.
like,
And
why do we
therefore, they
need to
were going
have
to
these
bring
other
in
people?
all of
Yeah.
these monsters to help, with the sales at the box office. And they kept trying to say to him, no, it's not about Universal losing faith in you. It's just a very funny way to incorporate Abbott and Costello with something different. And how different than being with all these monsters, which they had never done before. At any rate, Charlie Barton said, Lou, calm down, Dad. And they started, to shoot the film. And uh, from what I understand from those people, the kids that I am friendly with, such as Julie Ream, who's the cousin of Glenn Strange, who then took over the role of the monster, and also having had lunch with Bela Lugosi Jr. on some occasions years ago, they had a wonderful working relationship. Patty, my sister, recalls specifically being on the set and how interesting it was to see the monsters in full makeup, sitting in director's chairs, smoking cigarettes, and reading the newspaper. Uh, that that Glenn Strange in the Frankenstein monster makeup, it took 4 hours to get him into makeup. And a memo came from the top office saying absolutely no pie throwing. And Frankenstein is off limits
Uh,
because, of course, Dan Budd, to cut the time, or at least at the end of the film, would do a pie throwing thing,
yeah.
and people expected it. But Frankenstein was off limits. You couldn't do anything to Frankenstein because of the makeup. But Lenore Ober, who played Sandra in the film, used to put what was it, a collar, a dog's collar on Glenn Strange with a lead and parade him through the lot. And
Dressed
sometimes
as
there would be tourists
Frankenstein
on the
on a
lot,
leash.
yeah, who would absolutely just like scream bloody murder.
Uh,
Uh, but it was a happy set. It was Lon Chaney Jr. absolutely loved making the film. They were all so friendly with each other. And I think that Bela may have gotten a little upset at times because of the antics that would go on the set. But again, the reason why there was so much gag playing and joke playing off the set or between scenes was because it kept the energy level up. And that's what you have to do. You have to keep the energy level up. And Bobby Barber, who was an actor in many films and appears in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein at the Masquerade Party.
mhm.
Uh, he's in he's in just a short clip, but he would oftentimes create some of the gags that they would do, whether it's the match to the shoe or whether they were doing a scene and Bayless coming down the stairs and Bobby can be seen behind him with a cape on, covering, his nose and trying to imitate Bela walking down the steps, which is quite funny in the outtakes. But I think if Dad and Bud were here today, and especially Dad, you say, Dad, I know you didn't like this whole concept in the beginning, but look what this concept has done, for you and Bud. I mean, this is an iconic cult film.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
oh, really, during Halloween, my God, it's amazing. And to see it on the big screen, because there's a lot of theaters that will show it on the big screen, and to get the audience reaction is really worth it. So next Halloween or this Halloween, if anybody out there has a chance to see it in one of the theaters, and sometimes it's some of the smaller vintage houses that will put it on, make a point of seeing it to get the audience reaction. It's worth it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic. And the influence is everywhere. I mean, I was just Spielberg, even in the third Indiana Jones, when Harrison Ford and Sean Connery they kind of recreate that spinning wall thing. They're like
Yeah,
rotating. I think that's totally, I'd have to check with Spielberg, but that's totally, to me, I think probably was Steven watching that scene as a kid,
that
probably.
is
It's probably
so
burned into
funny.
his brain. But
Well,
I also
well,
think that
a lot of people think, especially from the East Coast, that the castle is somewhere in New Jersey. And I keep saying, no, 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 no. The castle, first of all, when you see it in a long shot, was the art department of Universal, and the interior was all shot on a soundstage. The
yeah.
same soundstage, by the way, Phantom of the Opera was shot in, what, 1920 something?
You mean the
And
the
then, of
the Lon
course,
Chaney, like, original silent classic?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly. That
yeah.
was
In fact,
25, I think.
they still had some of the sets from Phantom up. And
Right.
also, Here Come the Coeds was shot in that soundstage. But
Right.
sadly, it's no longer here. It was taken down to make way for more rides at Universal. That's sad.
Right.
It should have been stayed as a historical, soundstage,
Yeah.
because it's so known, for the Abbott and Costello Frankenstein.
Of course, yeah, and we wouldn't get, Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein and those other comedies, 30 years later or some 20 some years later, without this pioneering work. And so it's fascinating to me, that to hear that, your dad thought maybe it was, they were cramming too many monsters in, or that, that even that Bela Lugosi would reprise as Dracula. What he had done that in 1931, so he comes back in 48 to sort of do it in a comedy. But that Boris Karloff, who also did the original Frankenstein in 31, same year as Lugosi's Dracula, but he wouldn't come back. I just think that's fascinating. I guess, do you think it's because back then, those Universal monsters, it was all, it was seen as horror movies, and it was just, it kind of took your dad and Bud to convince them that it could, after the success of Meet Frankenstein? Do you think it was, the studios and audiences were realizing, wait a minute, there could be something funny about the spooky. You know what I mean? Like Monster Mash, the song would be in like 1962. But you know what I mean? Like I almost think it takes those Abbott and Costello meets the blanks to kind of recontextualize horror into comedy. I mean, do you
Well,
do you
I
think?
think I think the monsters were making a comeback, and there was a whole new audience. And I just feel that since Universal had the monsters and Abbott and Costello, and Abbott and Costello, of course, was still a great box office success. Why not combine them, put them together?
Yeah.
And of course, there was some fabulous writers, too. That there were like three or four writers, and I don't have my book in front of me to give you the names of the writers, but it. I think it just clicked. It really just clicked, and there's so many amazingly funny scenes in that film. You can
Absolutely.
you can see kind of when they start to ad lib, which I always love. But I remember Bud Jr. telling me he remembers being on the set. I was way, way too young. I was just a year old. But Bud Jr. said to walk on the set of Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, he said it was the color of the sets. He said, I always said, what a shame that Universal never made this film into a color Abbott and Costello film. He
Right. It's
said
black and white in all our brain, in all our memories,
oh,
you
he
know?
said it was just brilliant, just
Yeah.
brilliant. And then
Yeah.
I remember my cousin Sue, Pat Costello's daughter. Um, she was just maybe a year and a half old, almost two. And she said they brought her on the set. And when she saw the Wolfman, she just loved him and
Yeah.
would smile and giggle. She said, and then he would disappear. Well, then he'd come out of the makeup room without all the makeup on.
Yeah.
And she started crying like she liked him better, as the Wolfman than, she did seeing him as just a regular person. But my sister will tell the story like, mom brought me on the set and I'm a year old. And Glenn Strange, who was, on the set that day doing a scene, was in full makeup and he absolutely loved children. When he saw me in my mom's arms, he immediately got up from his chair and he started walking towards me with his arms outstretched, saying, "Come to Uncle Glenn." And with that, I let out the most blood curdling scream. And my dad was just saying, "Get her out of here, get her out of here."
That is
But
hilarious. That's hilarious.
I,
So wait, so then just so I have my timing right then. So if you were a year old during Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 48. So you were born in 47. So you would have been yeah, you would have been 1 year old.
yeah,
And then so that means that then you would have been what, 2 years old when they do Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer Boris Karloff. Funny how Karloff once he saw how big of a hit it was, now he wanted to do but and then, so then you would have been, I'm terrible at math, 4 years old when Abbott and Costello meet the Invisible Man, which is a natural sequel because they tease that in the boat at the end of Meet Frankenstein, right? You hear the voice that says, "I'm the Invisible Man," smoking this cigar or whatever. And then they do meet Jekyll and Hyde in 53 and then meet the Mummy in 55. So and then the song Monster Mash comes out in 62. All right. So yeah. All right. So there's the timeline there. So my point is you're relatively young during all and sort of your growing up formative years are while your dad's making these monster movies. So, I guess my question is, and you've been generous with your time, but like, he's going to set and doing all these monster movies in your youth, monster comedies. But then when he comes home, is he able to turn the switch off as, when he's just being dad, or was he also, one of the funniest people ever, What's it like being the daughter of one of the funniest freaking people of all time, when he's at home.
that I get asked that question a lot, but I always say, when dad left the studio, he left the character there as well.
Right.
When he came home, he just became dad, not the character that was on the screen. When I would look at my dad in a movie, to me, it was a character. It was not my dad. When he came
Right.
home, he wanted to be with family. There was dinner conversation around the table. Uh, he could be funny with the snap of a finger, Jason, because all you had to do was bring a child into the room, and he became Lou Costello, the comic.
Right.
He would trip over his feet, run into the wall. That was just, he gravitated towards children, and children gravitated towards him. And I think it was because he identified so much with that little boy, side that he had in him, of which allowed him to portray that character so beautifully,
Yeah.
on screen and when they would perform. But no, he could turn it on instantly. But dad was very quiet. He loved watching B westerns on television or in our home theater. He loved watching westerns. And so what do? Both he and Bud get ranches. And but dad was just fascinated with the westerns. And he would also hide what are those Snicker bars or whatever it was, Hershey bars. And my mom would find the candy wrappers like he was supposed to be watching his wife, or something. And
Yeah. Right.
he'd
Right.
find all these Hershey candy bar wrappers, in the den under his chair. But no, he was just dad. He was a great dad. I couldn't have asked for a better dad. He was very attentive. He was very giving. He was very that Italian Catholic from New Jersey. The boy never left New Jersey in his heart. It was everybody was so centrally located, like one street over was his sister, her family, and then two streets over was his mother and father, and Pat lived not too far from them, and it was weekend coffee clutches where you'd go to grandma's house and they would prop me up on these two telephone books at the kitchen table. They had those nooks back then. And he'd always bring a box of jelly donuts. He loved jelly donuts.
Yeah.
And he would sit there and he would dunk the jelly donut in his coffee and eat it. And I can remember seeing him with the coffee just dribbling down, his chin. And I thought, wow, that looks good. So I started doing it. They would give me a little bit of coffee in a cup and a cup and saucer, but with more milk than anything else. But I always loved the taste of coffee.
Yeah.
And I learned how to dunk a donut in coffee from my dad. So to this day, if you hand me a donut, I can't eat it unless I have a cup of coffee to dunk it in. Um,
Oh,
he was just a Jersey boy, both
yeah.
he and his brother, very attentive to their mother, even after our grandfather's passing. They never missed seeing her. He would even go and have a quick cup of coffee with her before going to the studio. So, he was a good person. People have asked me, how would you like your dad to be remembered? And I always say, well, of course, for being part of one of the most iconic comedy teams of the last century. But I also want people to know of him as a great humanitarian, a person who was always giving to others. The man had long arms, short pockets. If there was somebody in need, no questions asked. That person got what they needed. Great story. Joe Elias had the candy concession at Universal, had to go for an operation, but couldn't afford to because he relied on that business at the newsstand where they would sell newspapers, cigarettes,
Mhm.
magazines, candy, whatever. And Dad was talking to him one day, and he said, "Joe, I want you to see this doctor." And he handed him a piece of paper with the doctor's name and phone number. He said, "I've made the call. I want you to see him." And Joe did, and he needed an operation. And Dad said, "Well, you're getting the operation. Don't worry about it. It's all taken care of." And when Joe was in recuperating from the surgery, Dad and Bud every morning would go right to that concession stand and buy out everything
Wow.
just to keep them going.
Yeah.
And then when Joe came back to work, Dad and Bud chipped in and they bought him a scooter so that he could take all of this stuff around to the different sets or the sound stages so that he wouldn't have to walk or have people come to him. I mean, that's who he was and who Bud was. And that's what I want people to remember also is their goodness of heart. Truly, when I say if anybody had anything that they needed, they were right there.
Oh, absolutely. It's so I love hearing that personal slice and stories, but both the generous giving, like you just said, buying out the concession stand, or just the little memories of the dunking the donuts, and you probably smile every time you sip a coffee and eat a donut now, remembering that.
Makes me
Like
want to have a
I love
donut.
hearing those little personal stories. It's fantastic. Well, that's great. So yeah, then I guess just to sort of put a button on it, I mean, you kind of did by talking about his legacy, but I just want to, just sort of as we wind down here, but. So the duo of Abbott and Costello sort of amicably end their partnership around what 57. So you would have been about
Yeah.
10. So yeah, about 10 years after they had that Abbott and Costello show on NBC, I guess was in 47. So, and then they made those monster
Right.
movies, and yeah, and then 57 they split
Well,
up,
The Mummy was actually their last film for Universal.
right, in 55.
They
Yeah.
didn't renew with Universal, and then their last film as a team was Dance with Me, Henry.
What was it? Was it overexposure or just like all things, like because
No, I think
the
that, as my sister would put it, they climbed the top of the mountain. Where else could
yeah,
they go?
yeah,
They survived all these mediums from burlesque to radio to films to television,
yeah,
live performances. Where else could they go? They were older. Energy was not as high as it was when they were younger. And also, the industry was changing, Jason.
yeah,
Comedy was changing. They were riding the heels almost of the Lenny Bruce coming up, where
right.
comedy was just getting a little dirtier, off
Different
color,
edgier era coming in. Yeah,
and that
yeah,
wasn't Dad and Bud, but
no,
even audiences were changing,
yeah,
movies, films were changing. It was coming in to a new era. So I think so
yeah.
many factors played in, but also Dad really wanted to try dramatic acting, and I think it allowed him in that short time he had before he passed away
Mhm.
to do a wagon train, which
Yeah.
he was brilliant in, uh, as playing a drunk on a wagon train accused of murdering a member of the wagon train. Beverly Washburn, who I just spoke to the other day, who plays the little girl,
Oh, nice.
uh, which Dad credits Beverly Washburn, for his success in that episode. Not too many people would do that, especially today, but he credited her for his performance.
Wow.
Um, so, and she's a lovely lady. What a lovely, lovely lady.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Old Yeller, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. I can't speak any more highly of this lady. She said to me, she said, "Do you know, Chris, I still have the note he wrote to me. I have it framed and it's on my wall." And she
Hmm.
said, she said, I just loved him. I loved working with him.
Oh, that's
So,
great to hear. That's the highest praise when your co-stars can say that. Well, yeah, like you said, yeah. So he passed away, 59. So 2 years after Abbott Costello finally hung it up, and I guess your mom passed
yeah,
what, like 9 months after Dad?
9 months later, he died in
Um,
March. He died in December.
wow. So you would have been what, 10, and I guess then
Well, I was
no,
11
12,
when my
12.
dad died,
Yeah.
and then I turned 12 when my mom died.
Man, that's so well. I mean, even all these years later, sorry for your loss. Yeah, I know that sounds like so long ago, but it's still. I mean, that's rough at that age. But you're carrying that legacy with the memoir and now the audiobook and joining on for an hour with me. I didn't even know we would go this long. So, sorry for going
Also,
so long, but thank you
no,
so much.
no, also, Jason, if for anybody who's interested, we put out an amazing newsletter, which is every other month. The Abbott and Costello newsletter filled with interviews, photos, behind the scenes. It's chock full of stuff, even a trivia challenge. And we've got wonderful people who are contribute so much of their time in putting these issues together. And I got to mention them: Jeff Salamando, uh, Karen Cuccio is brilliant. Joe Savoya with his trivia challenge. Ron Palumbo, who wrote Abbott and Costello in Hollywood, is there to answer questions and to fact check us. It's great. So if anybody is interested in receiving it, they can certainly email us at accollectibles@aol.com. And all we need is their name, city, and state, and we'll get them on.
Awesome. Awesome. Oh, there you go. Please, everyone, reach out and take them up on that offer for sure. I know what I wanted to ask you is did real quick. So, Bud Abbott lived what, another like 15 years, I guess, longer than you. He
I
lived
think
until
he passed
1970
away in 74.
74. So, did you keep in touch in the years? Was he always good about reaching out?
Well, keep in mind that I'm just a kid,
Yeah.
and
Right.
then I get into my teen years. Well, that takes you off on a whole other course.
Yeah.
But I did spend an afternoon with him and his wife, Betty. I think I just got my driver's license. And of course, back then, when you get your driver's license, you'll do anything. You need to go to the market. Oh, I'll go. I'll go. Whatever you need, I'll do it. And I went out and I spent a lovely afternoon with Bud and Betty. Bud showed me around. He was showing me a scrapbook. He was showing this, that. And at the end of my visit, we're sitting on the couch and he was on a cane. And I was fascinated with his gold cigarette holder. And the TV was on, but it was like the volume was low. All of a sudden, I heard something very familiar, and it was the theme to the Abbott and Costello show.
No
And
way.
I looked up, and he looked up, but I looked at him, and he took his hands, and he clutched his cane, and he leaned in, and in this very low, whispery voice, but it was so heart touching. It just touched my heart, even as a young kid. He said, "I miss my pal,"
Ah,
and I said, "That about says it all." You know,
yeah.
you
Wow.
know, yeah, it was very touching. I never forgot those words. Never forgot the image of him doing that.
Oh, that's just great stories, man. I get a tear in my ear in stories like that. Well, it's that their work and legacy will live on and on. I mean, for generation after generation, we look back at that period, and there's I would put them on like the Mount Rushmore, if to quote a phrase of those classic comedy. You know, you got the Marx Brothers, the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, and Abbott and Costello. Like they're all. I mean, gosh, they made us laugh so much between all of those folks
Well,
that
they
it's
did.
just
You know,
iconic.
what's really wonderful, and I say this to so many people, is, you can love all the great legends because of what they brought to us.
Yeah,
Um, it's like people sometimes, well, I really like Laurel and Hardy. Well, that's fine. That's great. I love Laurel and Hardy too.
yeah, they don't have
Um,
to compete against each other.
right.
Love them
It's
all.
just who talks to you,
Yeah,
but who talks to you.
yeah.
And I think but I think with Dan and Bud, they were so appreciative of their peers and
Yeah.
very supportive of the work of their peers.
Yeah.
Dad with Stan Laurel, his daughter Lois, who's a good friend of mine, used to recount the story, which I've told so many times, about Dad who had his ranch not too far from Stan Laurel's ranch, and they would get together and visit. Well, Dad one day was over there at Stan's house, and they had a cook named Lillian who was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and they would try to outdo each other in the joke department, and Lillian would be in the kitchen, Lois would say, hysterical, just laughing and howling, and couldn't stop laughing and could barely get the lunch out. But Dad and Stan had a real deep appreciation for each other's works. Dad loved watching, Stan Laurel work, and Stan was very appreciative of Dad's work. They were different types of comics. And so I said, you can appreciate all of them. Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, even W.C. Fields, they were great artists. They were masters. And they each contributed something very unique, to audiences through the decades.
I agree, and I wasn't born until '84, so I think I first discovered Abbott Costello. Gosh, my family, I think we did a trip to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and
Oh,
they show the scene, the Who's on First from. I guess that one was from the naughty '90s, from 1945, right? Which obviously I've since revisited the movie, and there's great bits with the higher lower where Bud is arranging the backdrop on stage, and your dad's singing. He's trying to sing higher or lower based on where he's positioned.
oh yeah, I love that.
Oh, it's
Naughty
great.
Nineties, I love that.
Oh, and
Higher,
then just the
lower.
riverboat, just the whole setting. I love that movie. But I guess my point is yeah, like I probably didn't see it until, seeing that little time capsule of Who's on First at Cooperstown. And it's just funny how different generations discover them. And now, of course, it's all on, Fred Sternberg, our buddy PR guy who set up this thing, sent me a
Right.
whole Blu-ray collection of your dad's Abbott Costello's entire
Oh my
filmography.
God.
It's all on
Oh
Blu-ray
my
now.
God.
So
Fred is a
what a
good
guy,
guy.
right?
He is a good guy. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you for setting this up, Fred. Also, a
Oh,
new inductee into the Boxing Hall of Fame, by the way. Fred's a legend.
oh.
But hey, thank you so much for doing this and taking so much time for us. We got to let you run. It's been over an hour, and and you got donuts to Dunkin' coffee, so
Now I'm gonna have to go out and get a donut today with a cup of coffee.
exactly. And
I
now,
love try it. You'll like it, Jason. Have you ever done it?
I will do. I feel like we're about to go into like a Seinfeld routine about our dunking, a donut dunking technique. But actually, no, that's a Clark Gable and It Happened One Night. They talk about the dunking. That is a whole bit in It
Oh,
Happened One Night, by the way. Um,
oh, it's so wonderful. If you really want to, okay, get a glazed donut and dunk, because the sugar from the glazing
yeah.
mixed with the coffee, it's wonderful.
All right.
It's
Well,
wonderful.
as soon as we hang this up, I will at some point, like later this week or heading into Halloween sweet tooth. I'll get a donut and dunk it, and I'll think of your dad dunking it in the coffee. I promise.
You got it.
All right. Hey, Chris Costello, thank you so much for doing this. Again, you can pick up Lose on First, the audio book, and there's also a 10 CD collector set. You want to give him the email one more time?
Yeah, it's AC collectibles at AOL.com.
That's for the 10 CD
And if you
collection.
can't remember that, you can always find me on Facebook, and we've got various Abbott and Costello groups. So I'm out there.
Yep, and you can obviously listen to the audiobook wherever of Luzon First, wherever you can, stream audio stuff on Audible or wherever else. Thanks for doing this. I thought it'd be, there wasn't anything specific to really peg it to, but October with the World Series, Who's on First, Halloween with Meet Frankenstein, it kind of works. It's a good excuse to talk Hollywood history with you. So thank you
Oh,
so
I
much.
love it, Jason. Thank you so much. You're wonderful.
All right, let's go dunk some donuts. We'll talk to you later.
Got it. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.